February 14th, 1936. Valentine's Day. While most of Harlem was thinking about flowers and chocolates, Tommy Slice Morrison was counting bodies. 9 men. All connected to the Italian operations north of 110th Street. All dead within 6 days. And it started with a smile. Not a threat. Not a warning shot. Not even a raised voice. Just Lucky Luciano looking across a table at Bumpy Johnson inside the Cotton Club's back room, and smiling. That smile cost 9 men their lives. Here's what you need to understand, this wasn't mob warfare as usual. This wasn't the Castellamarese War or some turf dispute that had been building for months. This was surgical. Deliberate. And it happened because of one conversation most people in Harlem didn't even know took place. 3 days before the first body dropped, Bumpy walked into a meeting he wasn't invited to. The Cotton Club. 2 a.m. The music had stopped an hour earlier, but the real business was just beginning. Ani Madden's place was neutral ground, or as neutral as any place could be when organized crime ran the block. Lucky Luciano sat at the corner booth. Dutch Schultz was there. Meyer Lansky. Frank Costello. The commission hadn't been formally organized yet, but these were the men who would create it. They were carving up New York like a Thanksgiving turkey, and Harlem was on the menu. Bumpy Johnson walked in without an appointment. The door guards knew him. Everybody knew Bumpy. But knowing someone and letting them interrupt a commission meeting are two very different things. Luciano saw him first. He didn't stand. Didn't reach for a weapon. Didn't signal his men. He smiled. Bumpy, Luciano said, his voice carrying that strange mix of Sicilian warmth and Brooklyn ice. You got something that can't wait? Dutch Schultz's hand moved under the table. Meyer Lansky's eyes narrowed. This was the moment where men either backed down or got carried out. Bumpy didn't sit. He didn't need to. You're discussing operations above 110th, Bumpy said. Not a question. A fact. Thought you might want a local perspective before you make decisions you can't unmake. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Schultz started to stand. Luciano raised one finger, barely a movement, and Schultz sat back down. Local perspective, Luciano repeated. Still smiling. That what we need, Meyer? Lansky didn't answer. He was watching Bumpy the way a jeweler watches a diamond, trying to determine if it's real or glass. Bumpy laid it out clean. Your boys have been moving product through Lenox Avenue without paying tribute. Running numbers without talking to the people who've been running them for a decade. Opening policy banks like they're setting up lemonade stands. He paused. That stops now, or 9 of your operations go dark by the end of the week. Not a threat. A forecast. Dutch Schultz laughed. Actually laughed. You're threatening us? In Ani's place? Kid, you got balls, I'll give you. He's not threatening, Luciano interrupted, still looking at Bumpy. He's negotiating. And that's when Luciano smiled. Not at what Bumpy said. At what Bumpy didn't say. Because Bumpy didn't mention which 9 operations. Didn't say how. Didn't bring muscle or make a show of force. He just stated a fact and waited. Luciano stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the door. He paused next to Bumpy, close enough that his words were just for him. 9 operations, Luciano said quietly. by the end of the week. Then he left. Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello followed. Dutch Schultz stayed seated, staring at Bumpy like he was trying to memorize his face for future reference. Bumpy walked out the same door he came in. 72 hours later, the first body turned up in an alley behind Savoy Ballroom. The first man who died wasn't supposed to be in Harlem at all. His name was Vincent Terrano. Vinny to his friends. He ran a small numbers operation out of a barber shop on 116th Street, Italian barber, Italian clientele, Italian money flowing back to Dutch Schultz's organization downtown. Vinny had a problem nobody knew about. His daughter, Rosa, was 16 and needed surgery. Tuberculosis had settled in her lungs, and the only doctor who could help worked out of a private clinic in New Jersey. Cost $800. Vinny made maybe $60 a week on a good week. So when Dutch Schultz told him to expand operations into 2 more blocks, Negro blocks, Bumpy's blocks, Vinny didn't ask questions. He said yes because Schultz promised him a bonus. $200 up front. Another $600 when the new policy banks were running smooth. Vinny needed that money more than he needed to understand Harlem politics. February 15th, Saturday morning, Vinny opened the barber shop at 6 a.m. like always. He had 3 policy runners scheduled to meet him before the weekend rush. These were local guys, Harlem guys, who Schultz had hired to make the expansion look natural. 2 of them showed up. The third one, Marcus Webb, was standing across the street, watching. Marcus had worked for Bumpy Johnson for 4 years. Started as a lookout when he was 14, graduated to collections, now handled street-level intelligence. He was 23 years old, married 8 months, and his wife Lorraine was 6 months pregnant with their first child. Marcus didn't want to be there that morning. 3 days earlier, Bumpy had pulled him aside after a policy meeting. Didn't ask him to do anything violent. Didn't hand him a weapon. Just gave him an address and a time. "You watch that barber shop Saturday morning," Bumpy had said. "You see who goes in. You see who comes out. You remember faces." That was it. Marcus knew what it meant. In Bumpy's operation, nothing was random. If you were told to watch someone, it meant someone was about to stop being worth watching. He told Lorraine he had to work. Didn't tell her what kind of work. Now he stood across from Vinny's barber shop, hands in his pockets, watching 2 policy runners walk inside like they were just showing up for a haircut. Vinny greeted them at the door. Marcus could see him through the window, smiling, shaking hands, professional. Vinny didn't look like muscle. He looked like somebody's uncle. Thinning hair, soft around the middle, glasses that slid down his nose when he talked. Marcus had done his homework. He knew about Rosa. Knew about the medical bills. Knew Vinny was in deep with Schultz not because he wanted power, but because he was desperate. That made it worse somehow. The 2 runners sat in barber chairs. Vinny didn't cut their hair. He handed them envelopes, cash, probably, and instructions for setting up the new policy banks. The transaction took maybe 10 minutes. When they left, Marcus followed them. Not close. Not obvious. Just enough to see where they went. The first runner headed west toward Amsterdam Avenue. The second one, a thin kid named Paulie who couldn't have been older than 19, walked south on Lenox. Marcus stayed with Paulie. 2 blocks down, a car rolled up beside Paulie. Black Cadillac. Windows down. Paulie saw it and ran. He made it maybe 20 feet. The shots came fast, 3 pops that sounded like firecrackers in the morning cold. Paulie went down hard on the sidewalk, his envelope scattering policy slips into the gutter. The Cadillac didn't stop. It rolled through the intersection and disappeared. Marcus stood frozen on the corner, 50 yards away, watching Paulie bleed out on the pavement. He didn't move to help. Couldn't. That wasn't the job. By the time the police arrived 20 minutes later, Marcus was gone. But he wasn't the only one who'd seen it. Vincent Terrano heard about Paulie's death before noon. The other runner, the one who went west, came back to the barber shop shaking so hard he could barely speak. They killed him, the runner kept saying. They shot Paulie right on Lenox. Right in the street. Vinny closed the barber shop. Locked the door. Sat in the back room with his head in his hands. He had $600 coming from Dutch Schultz. He needed it. Rose's surgery was scheduled for March 2nd, 2 weeks away. But now he understood what Bumpy Johnson's warning had meant. 9 operations go dark by the end of the week. Vinny wasn't running an operation anymore. He was running a target. He had 2 choices, walk away and lose the money, or keep going and risk ending up like Paulie. That night, Vinny went home to his apartment in Little Italy. His wife, Angela, had dinner waiting. Rosa was in bed, coughing through the walls. He didn't tell Angela what happened. He sat at the kitchen table and stared at the $800 Dutch Schultz had given him. $200 up front. It was right there in an envelope, next to the salt shaker. Blood money now. But it was also Rosa's only chance. Vincent Terrano made his decision Sunday morning. He went back to the barber shop. Not to open for business. To meet with the man Dutch Schultz sent to check on the operation, an enforcer named Carlo Venti. Carlo was everything Vinny wasn't, young, violent, comfortable with blood. He'd grown up in the Bronx breaking arms for loan sharks before Schultz promoted him to management. Carlo showed up at 8 a.m. with 2 other men. He didn't knock. He had a key. Vinny was already inside, sweeping up hair from yesterday's work, trying to look normal. Heard about Paulie, Carlo said, not bothering with a greeting. Schultz wants to know if you're still solid. Vinny kept sweeping. I'm solid. You sure? Because solid means you open those 2 policy banks this week like we discussed. Solid means you don't let some Harlem crew scare you off territory that belongs to us now. Vinny stopped sweeping. Looked at Carlo. Paulie's dead. And? Carlo lit a cigarette. Paulie knew the risks. You know the risks. Schultz is paying you good money to take those risks. You want to back out, fine, but you give back every dollar, and you explain to Schultz why you wasted his time. $600 Vinny didn't have yet. $200 he'd already mentally spent on Rosa's surgery deposit. I'm not backing out, Vinny said quietly. Good. Carlo smiled. Then here's what happens next. Tomorrow night, you meet with 3 new runners. Local guys, all vetted. They'll handle the street work. You just manage the money and report to me. Simple. Where's the meet? Savoy Ballroom. Back entrance. 11 p.m. Vinny's stomach dropped. The Savoy was Bumpy Johnson's territory. Not just geographically, culturally. Every major decision in Harlem's underworld passed through that building at some point. Why there? Vinny asked. Carlo's smile widened. Because Schultz wants to make a point. We're not hiding anymore. Harlem's opening up, and if Bumpy's got a problem with it, he can take it up with us directly. That's when Vinny understood. He wasn't just running a policy bank. He was being used as bait. Schultz wanted Bumpy to react. Wanted an excuse to escalate. And Vinny was the match being struck in a room full of gasoline. Across town, Marcus Webb sat in Bumpy Johnson's office above the Rhythm Club. It wasn't really an office, more like a storage room with a desk and 2 chairs. But it was private, and in Bumpy's world, privacy was currency. Tell me what you saw, Bumpy said. Marcus recounted everything: Vinny at the barber shop, the 2 runners, Paulie getting shot. He didn't embellish. Didn't editorialize. Just facts. Bumpy listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Bumpy was quiet for a long time. Finally, you know why I sent you to watch instead of handle it yourself? Marcus shook his head. Because you're about to be a father, Bumpy said. And fathers need to understand something soldiers don't. When you make a move, you're not just risking yourself. You're risking everyone who depends on you. Marcus felt the weight of that. So what happens now? Now we see if Vinny's smart or desperate. Bumpy leaned back. Desperate men are dangerous. They'll do things smart men won't, because they've got nothing left to lose. Vinny's got a sick daughter. That makes him desperate. You knew about Rosa? I know about everyone in my territory. The question isn't what I know, it's what I do with it. Bumpy stood up, walked to the window. Below, Lenox Avenue was waking up. Sunday morning church crowds starting to gather. Schultz thinks he can push into Harlem because he's got Italian muscle and commission backing, Bumpy said. But he doesn't understand this neighborhood. Doesn't understand that every policy bank, every numbers runner, every street corner has history. You can't just buy your way in. So we're going to war? No. Bumpy turned from the window. We're going to make them think they already lost one. He handed Marcus a piece of paper with an address. Tomorrow night. 11 p.m. Savoy Ballroom, back entrance. Schultz is sending Vinny to meet new runners. I want you there. Not inside, outside. You watch who shows up. You count how many. You leave before anything happens. Marcus looked at the paper. That's it? Just watch? That's it. But Marcus knew better. Watching was never just watching in Bumpy's operation. It meant something was about to happen, and Bumpy wanted eyes on it when it did. Monday evening, Vincent Terrano kissed his daughter goodnight. Rosa was getting worse. The coughing had turned wet, rattling. Angela kept asking when they could schedule the surgery. Vinny kept saying soon. He left the apartment at 10 p.m., caught a cab uptown. The Savoy Ballroom was alive when he arrived. Monday night swing dancing, the best bands in Harlem playing to a packed floor. But Vinny wasn't there for the music. He went around to the back entrance like Carlo had instructed. 2 men were waiting. Not the runners he was supposed to meet, Carlo's guys. Enforcers. Change of plans, one of them said. Carlo wants you to wait inside. The runners are coming in through the front, mixing with the crowd. Less obvious. Vinny hesitated. Something felt wrong. It's fine, the enforcer said, reading his face. Just precaution. Bumpy's got people watching the streets. We need to be smart about this. Vinny followed them inside. The back hallway was narrow, dimly lit. The sound of the band vibrated through the walls. They led him to a storage room, empty except for stacked chairs and old equipment. "Wait here," the enforcer said. 15 minutes. They left. Locked the door from the outside. Vinny stood alone in the dark storage room, listening to distant music, and realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Outside, Marcus Webb watched from across the street as Carlo Venti and 4 other men approached the Savoy's back entrance. Not 3 runners. 5 armed men. Marcus's instructions were clear: watch and leave. But something in his gut told him this wasn't about policy banks anymore. This was an execution. Marcus Webb broke protocol. Instead of leaving, he moved closer. Crossed the street, slipped into the alley adjacent to the Savoy's back entrance. Close enough to hear voices. Carlo Venti was talking to his men. "Schultz wants this loud. Wants Bumpy to know we're not playing." One of the enforcers laughed. "What about Vinny?" "What about him?" "He's in the room. He'll see what happens when you work for us in Harlem." Marcus's blood went cold. They weren't there to meet runners. They were there to kill someone and make Vinny watch. But who? The answer came 30 seconds later. A car pulled up. Black Packard. 3 men got out, hands in their pockets, walking like they owned the block. Marcus recognized one of them immediately: Raymond Ray Corbett. Bumpy's top lieutenant. The man who handled enforcement, collections, everything that required a firm hand. Ray was walking into a trap. Carlo and his men moved into position, flanking the back entrance. They weren't even hiding. This was theater. They wanted witnesses. Marcus had maybe 20 seconds to decide. He could run back to Bumpy, report what he saw. But by the time he got there, Ray would be dead. He could shout a warning. But that would expose him, and Carlo's men would gun him down too. Or he could do nothing. Watch a good man die. Go home to Lorraine and pretend he didn't have blood on his hands. Marcus stepped out of the alley. "Ray," he shouted. "It's a setup." Everything happened at once. Ray and his men turned, reaching for weapons. Carlo's enforcers opened fire. The back alley exploded with gunshots, not the clean pop-pop-pop from Paulie's execution, but a full barrage. Ray went down. So did one of his men. But the third man with Ray, an enforcer named Jackson, returned fire. Caught one of Carlo's guys in the chest. The man dropped. Marcus ran. Didn't look back. Just ran east on 140th Street, expecting bullets to chase him. They didn't. Inside the storage room, Vincent Terrano heard the shots and dropped to the floor. His heart hammered. This was it. Whatever was happening, he was locked in a room 20 feet from a shootout. The gunfire stopped. Voices shouted. Footsteps. Then silence. Vinny waited. 5 minutes. 10. Finally, the door unlocked. Carlo Venti stood there, blood on his shirt, not his own. His face was cold, furious. "Get up," Carlo said. Vinny stood, shaking. "You see what happens?" Carlo grabbed him by the collar, dragged him to the back door. "You see what happens when Bumpy tries to muscle us?" In the alley, Ray Corbett lay dead. One of his men too. But so did 2 of Carlo's enforcers. It wasn't the clean execution Carlo had planned. It was a mess. "This is on you now," Carlo said, shoving Vinny toward the bodies. "You're gonna tell Schultz that Bumpy sent his top guy to kill you. That we saved your life. You understand?" Vinny couldn't speak. Could barely breathe. I said, "Do you understand?" "Yes," Vinny whispered. Carlo shoved him away. "Get out of here. Go home. We'll contact you." Vinny ran. Didn't stop until he was 12 blocks away, gasping in an alley, vomiting onto the pavement. Marcus made it back to the Rhythm Club just after midnight. Bumpy was still in his office. He looked up when Marcus burst in, out of breath, wild-eyed. "Ray's dead," Marcus said. "They ambushed him at the Savoy. Carlo Venti and at least 4 others. I tried to warn him, but..." Bumpy raised a hand. "I know." Marcus froze. "You know? Ray's been dead for 2 hours. I got word 30 minutes ago." "Then why?" Marcus stopped. His mind raced, trying to piece it together. "You sent him there knowing it was a trap?" "No." Bumpy stood up, walked to a filing cabinet, pulled out a folder. "I sent him there because Carlo Venti was supposed to think it was a trap." He opened the folder. Inside were surveillance photos, Carlo meeting with Dutch Schultz, Carlo talking to the 2 enforcers who'd accompanied Vinny, Carlo entering the Savoy earlier that evening. "Ray knew," Bumpy said quietly. "He volunteered. Understood what it would cost." Marcus felt sick. "Why?" "Because Schultz needed to think he was winning." Bumpy laid out the photos like cards on a table. "He needed to believe he could hit us on our own territory. Needed to get confident. Arrogant. But Ray's dead. 2 of our guys are dead. 3 of theirs are dead too," Bumpy said. "And now Schultz thinks he started a war he's winning. He'll push harder. Send more men. Get aggressive." Marcus shook his head, trying to understand. "That's good for us." Bumpy looked at him with something like sympathy. "You're about to be a father. You need to learn how war actually works. It's not about who shoots first or who shoots most. It's about who controls what the other side believes." He pulled out another photo. This one showed a man Marcus didn't recognize, tall, thin, wearing an expensive suit. "This is Vincent Call," Bumpy said. "Irish. Hates the Italians. Hates Schultz specifically. Been trying to muscle into bootlegging for 2 years, but he's too small, too isolated. What's he got to do with this? Right now, nothing. But tomorrow, when word spreads that Schultz's men killed Ray Corbett in a Harlem ballroom, when every numbers runner and policy banker in a 50-block radius hears that Schultz is trying to take over by force..." Bumpy smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. Call's gonna hear opportunity. So are the Irish crews in Hell's Kitchen. So are the independent operators who've been too scared to move against Schultz. Marcus finally understood. You're not fighting Schultz yourself. You're making everyone else fight him. I'm making sure that when Schultz goes to war in Harlem, he's fighting on 12 fronts at once. And the commission, Luciano, Lansky, all of them, they'll see him as unstable. Reckless. A liability. Bumpy closed the folder. Ray understood that. Understood that sometimes one death prevents 100. Doesn't make it hurt less. Doesn't make it right. But it makes it necessary. Marcus thought about Lorraine. About the baby coming. About being locked in a storage room while men died outside. What about Vincent Terrano? Marcus asked. Bumpy's expression darkened. What about him? Carlo used him. Made him watch the whole thing. Vinny's just a guy trying to pay for his daughter's surgery. I know. So what happens to him? Bumpy walked back to the window, looked down at Lenox Avenue. Vinny had a choice, he said. He chose Schultz's money over Harlem's rules. That choice has consequences. He didn't know. Doesn't matter. Bumpy's voice was flat. Final. You can't run a neighborhood on sympathy. Vinny opened a policy bank on my territory. He brought Carlo Venti to the Savoy. Whether he meant to or not, he's part of this now. Marcus wanted to argue. Wanted to say Vinny wasn't like Carlo, wasn't a soldier. But he'd seen the look on Vinny's face that morning at the barber shop. Vinny knew. Maybe not all of it, but enough. 9 operations, Marcus said quietly. That's what you told Luciano. We're only at 3 deaths. Paulie, Ray, and Carlo's men. Bumpy nodded. 6 more to go. Including Vinny? Bumpy didn't answer. He didn't have to. Vincent Terrano didn't go home that night. He walked. Block after block, aimless, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. Ray Corbett's body in the alley. The blood. Carlo's hand on his collar, forcing him to look. By the time he found himself on a bench in Marcus Garvey Park, it was 3 a.m. The city was quiet. Cold February wind cut through his coat. He thought about Rosa. About the surgery scheduled for March 2nd. About the $800 sitting in his kitchen drawer, blood money that might save his daughter's life. A car pulled up to the curb. Not Carlo. Not Schultz's men. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. Mid-40s, well-dressed, carrying herself with the kind of authority that didn't need muscle behind it. Stephanie St. Clair. Harlem called her Queenie. She'd run numbers in this neighborhood before Schultz ever looked north of 110th Street. You're a long way from Little Italy, Vincent, she said. Vinny stood up, instinctively defensive. I'm just sitting on a park bench at 3 a.m. covered in someone else's guilt. She walked closer, studying him. I know what happened at the Savoy. I know Carlo used you. I know about Rosa. Vinny's throat tightened. If you're here to kill me, if I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. She sat on the bench, gestured for him to sit. I'm here because Bumpy sent me. Why? To give you a choice. Real one this time, not the trap Carlo put you in. Vinny sat slowly. What kind of choice? Stephanie pulled an envelope from her coat. Handed it to him. Inside, $800. Exact amount. Surgery money, she said. No strings. You take Rosa to that clinic in Jersey, you get her fixed up, you go back to cutting hair in Little Italy. Vinny stared at the money. And you tell Dutch Schultz you're done. You shut down the barbershop operation, you walk away clean. Schultz won't just let me walk. Schultz is about to have bigger problems than a barber who got cold feet. Stephanie's voice was matter-of-fact. You saw what happened tonight. That wasn't the end. That was the beginning. You stay in, you're a corpse by Friday. Vinny's hands shook holding the envelope. Why would Bumpy help me? I brought Carlo to his territory. I'm part of why Ray Corbett's dead. You're part of it, yeah. Stephanie didn't soften it. But you're not Carlo. You're not a soldier. You're a father who made a desperate choice. Bumpy understands desperate choices. So this is mercy? This is business. Stephanie stood up. Bumpy needs you alive more than he needs you dead. You go back to Schultz, tell him you can't handle the heat after what you saw. You cry, you shake, you play the scared barber. Schultz thinks you're useless, cuts you loose. And if he doesn't buy it, then you take your family and you run. But either way, you're done working for him. Vinny looked at the money. $800. Rosa's life. What's Bumpy get out of this? Stephanie smiled coldly. Schultz loses a lieutenant, a foothold, and credibility, all because a barber got spooked. Makes him look weak. Makes other operators think twice about working for him. She walked back to the car, paused with her hand on the door. You've got until sunrise to decide. Take the money and run, or give it back and take your chances with Schultz. But don't fool yourself into thinking there's a third option where you keep working for him and keep your daughter. There isn't. She drove away. Vinny sat alone on the bench, holding $800 and the weight of everything it represented. By Tuesday afternoon, word had spread through Harlem's underworld like fire through dry grass. Ray Corbett was dead. Dutch Schultz's men had ambushed him at the Savoy. The shooting had been brazen, public, disrespectful. In the pool halls and speakeasies, in the policy banks and numbers joints, people were talking. Not just about the violence was common, but about what it meant. Schultz was making a move. A real one. And Bumpy Johnson hadn't retaliated. That silence was louder than gunfire. Vincent Call heard about it in a basement bar on 10th Avenue. The Irish gangster listened to the story twice, asked specific questions, then made a phone call. By Wednesday, 3 of Schultz's liquor trucks had been hijacked. 2 speakeasies under Schultz's protection got robbed. A warehouse in the Bronx burned to the ground. Schultz knew it was Call. Everyone knew. But he couldn't prove it, and more importantly, he couldn't respond without looking like he was losing control. The commission noticed. Lucky Luciano sat in a restaurant in Little Italy on Thursday, reading reports. Meyer Lansky sat across from him. Schultz is bleeding, Lansky said. Calls hitting him every day. The Harlem expansions turned into a disaster. Ray Corbett's dead, Luciano said. Bumpy should be going to war. Maybe he is. Just not the way Schultz expected. Luciano set down the report. You think Bumpy planned this? I think Bumpy's smarter than anyone gave him credit for. Lansky lit a cigarette. He let Schultz think he could win, then sat back while everyone else smelled blood. Luciano was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. The same smile he'd given Bumpy at the Cotton Club. Friday morning, February 21st, Carlo Venti's body was found in a car on the West Side Highway. Single bullet to the head. Professional. That made 6 deaths. Vincent Terrano read about it in the newspaper while sitting in the waiting room of the New Jersey clinic. Rosa was in surgery. Angela sat beside him, praying quietly. Vinny had made his choice Tuesday morning. He'd gone to Schultz, played the terrified barber perfectly. Schultz had called him weak, pathetic, useless, then cut him loose. Vinny took his family to Jersey that afternoon. Now he sat in a plastic chair, holding Angela's hand, waiting to hear if his daughter would live. The $800 was gone. Spent on surgery, on hope, on a future that might still exist. He thought about Carlo. About Ray Corbett. About the bodies stacking up because men like Schultz and Bumpy were playing chess with human pieces. He'd been one of those pieces. But he'd survived. The doctor came out 2 hours later. The surgery went well, she said. Rosa's going to need months of recovery, but she'll live. Angela broke down crying. Vinny just sat there, numb, grateful, drowning in relief and guilt in equal measure. Outside the clinic, across the street, a black Cadillac was parked. Marcus Webb sat in the driver's seat, watching. Making sure Vinny got on a train back to Little Italy and never came back to Harlem. Making sure the choice Bumpy had given him stuck. Marcus thought about Ray Corbett. About the plan. About the 3 men still going to die before the week was over. He thought about Lorraine, about their baby coming in 3 months. And he wondered if mercy was ever really mercy, or just another kind of leverage. By Saturday, Dutch Schultz was unraveling. Carlo Venti dead. 3 operations shut down. Vincent call hitting him from the west. Independent operators in Harlem refusing to work with him. And the commission was watching. Schultz called a meeting at a warehouse in the Bronx. Brought in his top people, what was left of them. He was screaming before anyone even sat down. 6 days. Schultz paced like a caged animal. 6 days and we've lost more ground than we took in 6 months. Who's running this? Who's feeding information to Bumpy? Nobody answered. Nobody wanted to be the next body. Carlo was solid, Schultz continued. Ray Corbett's dead. We should be celebrating. Instead, I've got Irish crews robbing my trucks and Bumpy Johnson sitting in Harlem like he's untouchable. One of his lieutenants, a man named Eddie Rourke, spoke up carefully. Maybe we pulled back from Harlem. Regroup. Focus on. Schultz threw a chair. It crashed against the wall. Pull back? That's your advice? Show weakness to every 2-bit operator in Manhattan? He leaned over the table, veins bulging in his neck. We double down. I want every man we've got in Harlem by Monday. I want Bumpy's operations burned to the ground. Eddie exchanged glances with the other lieutenants. This was desperation talking. Schultz was emotional, sloppy, exactly what the commission hated. The meeting ended with vague commitments and worried faces. But Schultz wasn't done. That night, he sent 8 men into Harlem. Not to establish policy banks or negotiate territory. To send a message. They hit 3 locations, a numbers joint on 125th, a speakeasy Bumpy protected on Lenox, and Stephanie St. Clair's brownstone office. The numbers joint went up in flames. The speakeasy got shot up, nobody killed, but the message was clear. The brownstone was different. Schultz's men kicked in the door just after midnight. They expected to find Stephanie and maybe a guard or 2. Instead, they found 12 men waiting for them. Not Bumpy's crew. Not Harlem locals. Vincent calls Irish boys. The gunfight lasted 90 seconds. When it was over, 3 of Schultz's men were dead. 2 more were wounded, dragged out by the survivors. Call's men didn't chase them. They just stood in the doorway, smoking cigarettes, letting them run. Stephanie St. Clair hadn't even been in the building. She'd been tipped off 2 hours earlier, by Bumpy. Carl had been tipped off by Bumpy too. The whole thing had been a setup. Schultz had sent his men to intimidate Harlem's policy queen and walked straight into an ambush orchestrated by the man he thought he was beating. 9 men dead. Exactly what Bumpy had promised. Sunday morning, Lucky Luciano read the reports in his apartment overlooking Central Park. 9 deaths. Schultz's operation in chaos. Vincent call emboldened and expanding. The Harlem situation spiraling out of control. Frank Costello arrived at noon. Meyer Lansky 20 minutes later. They sat in Luciano's living room, and nobody had to say it out loud. Dutch Schultz had become a problem. He's acting like a street thug, Costello said. Burning speakeasies, sending crews into firefights. This isn't how we operate. He's desperate, Lansky added. Lost 6 men, lost credibility, lost the respect of every independent operator in Manhattan. Luciano stood at the window, looking out over the city. Bumpy did this, he said quietly. Bumpy defended his territory, Lansky corrected. No. Luciano turned to face them. Bumpy didn't defend anything. He orchestrated it. Let Schultz think he could win, then made sure every move Schultz made cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. Costello frowned. You saying Bumpy set up Ray Corbett's death? I'm saying Bumpy understood what Schultz would do and built the whole board around it. Luciano walked back to his chair. He's not a soldier. He's a strategist. So what do we do? Luciano was quiet for a long moment. We call a meeting. Schultz, Bumpy, the whole commission. We settle this before it gets worse. And if Schultz doesn't agree to terms? Luciano's expression went cold. Then Schultz becomes a lesson about what happens when you make the commission look weak. In Harlem, the streets were tense but quiet. Bumpy Johnson sat in the rhythm club with Stephanie St. Clair, going over the week's numbers. Policy banks running smooth. Protection payments up. Territory secure. Schultz lost 9 men, Stephanie said. Carl's taking credit for half of them. Let him. Bumpy didn't look up from the ledger. The more credit Carl takes, the less attention on us. Luciano's going to figure it out eventually. He already has. Bumpy closed the ledger. That's why he smiled at me in the Cotton Club. He knew what I was going to do before I did it. Stephanie lit a cigarette. So what happens now? Now we wait for the commission to clean up the mess. Schultz is finished, he just doesn't know it yet. And Vincent Terrano? Bumpy's jaw tightened. What about him? You let him walk. Gave him the money for his daughter. That's not like you. Vinny was a civilian caught in the crossfire. Killing him would have made us look brutal. Saving him made Schultz look incompetent. Bumpy stood up, stretched. Everything's a message, Stephanie. Even mercy. She studied him. You're getting colder, Bumpy. More like them. Like who? Luciano. Lansky. The Italians you said you'd never become. Bumpy walked to the window. Down on the street, Harlem was coming alive. Sunday afternoon crowds, families, music drifting from open windows. Difference is, he said quietly, I'm doing this for Harlem. They're doing it for themselves. Stephanie didn't respond. She'd heard that justification before. From every gangster who ever convinced himself he was different. Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway. Vinny's on a train back to Little Italy. He's not coming back. Bumpy nodded. Good. What about Ray's family? Taken care of. Funeral's Tuesday. We're covering everything. Make sure they know it. Bumpy turned from the window. Make sure everyone knows we take care of our own. Marcus hesitated. Was it worth it? Ray, I mean. Was what we got worth what it cost? Bumpy looked at him for a long moment. Ask me that again when your child is born, he said. When you're trying to raise a family in a neighborhood where men like Schultz think they can just take what they want. Ask me if 9 deaths prevented 100. Marcus didn't ask again. He left the office, went home to Lorraine, and held her while she slept. 3 months later, when his daughter was born, he'd think about that question. But he still wouldn't have an answer. 3 weeks later, Dutch Schultz was summoned to a commission meeting. He never made it. Vincent Call's men caught him outside a restaurant in Midtown. The official story was that Call acted alone, revenge for old territorial disputes. But the commission didn't look too hard into it. Schultz had become unstable, unpredictable. His death solved more problems than it created. Lucky Luciano attended the funeral. So did Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello. Bumpy Johnson didn't. He sent flowers. The card read, Harlem remembers. Nothing more. Vincent Terrano never returned to the barber shop on 116th Street. He sold it to a cousin, took the money, and moved his family to a small house in Queens. Rosa recovered fully from her surgery. By summer, she was back in school. Vinny never told Angela the truth about where the $800 came from. Never mentioned Carlo Venti or Ray Corbett or the storage room at the Savoy. But every night, lying in bed, he thought about it. He'd survived because someone decided mercy was more useful than murder. He didn't know if that made him lucky or just another pawn who got left on the board. Marcus Webb's daughter was born on May 17, 1936. He named her Rayanne, after Ray Corbett. Lorraine never asked why. She knew. Marcus stayed with Bumpy Johnson for another 8 years. Rose through the ranks. Made good money. Kept his family safe. But he never forgot the week 9 men died. Never forgot watching Paulie bleed out on Lenox Avenue while he stood 50 yards away, doing nothing. Never forgot Ray Corbett walking into the Savoy knowing it was a trap. In 1944, Marcus left the life. Opened a small grocery store in Harlem. Raised his daughter to stay far away from men like Bumpy Johnson. She did. But she also grew up in a neighborhood that stayed independent, that never got swallowed by the Italian Commission, that remained Harlem. And that happened because 9 men died in February 1936. Lucky Luciano never forgot that smile either. Years later, after he'd been deported to Italy, after the commission had evolved into something bigger and more corporate, he told an associate about Bumpy Johnson. We controlled half of New York, Luciano said. Had the muscle, had the money, had the political connections. We could have crushed Harlem in a week if we wanted. So why didn't you? Luciano smiled, that same smile from the Cotton Club. Because Bumpy taught me something that week. He taught me that the smartest move isn't always the most powerful one. Sometimes it's letting the other guy think he's winning, right up until he realizes he already lost. You respected him. I did. Still do. Luciano looked out at the Mediterranean Sea. Most gangsters want to be feared. Bumpy wanted to be necessary. There's a difference. The real cost of that week wasn't counted in bodies. It was counted in the families who lost fathers. In the choices desperate men made that they couldn't unmake. In the moral weight carried by people like Marcus Webb, who understood that survival sometimes meant watching good people die. 9 men were dead. But Harlem stayed Harlem. And in Bumpy Johnson's world, that was the only calculation that mattered. Whether it was worth it? That depended on who you asked. And when. If you want more stories about the real cost of power, the choices that haunt people, the moments that change everything, the history nobody talks about, hit subscribe. Because the truth is always more complicated than the legend.